What's up guys, this is Heat. I wanted to do a build guide video for the first build I played in the Hardcore Perandus League, a Scion dodge-based point-blank elemental blast rain build. Originally this build was going to be a bow summoner, but when I did the late transition into the build, I didn't really like how it played, and coupled with the fact that the Scion Raider class got a nerf that I wasn't aware of, made me look for an alternative. I hadn't played a bow build in a long time, so I decided to check out one of the more newly released skills, Blast Rain, and build around it, the end result being this build. Offensively, this build is non-crit elemental based. In this case, most of the damage comes from the Aura Gem's Anger and Wrath, high elemental damage on my bow, and essentially anything that scales weapon elemental damage. Support gems like Elemental Focus, weapon elemental damage in the tree and on gear, etc. It also uses one of my favorite keystone passives in the game, Point Blank, which gives you more damage the closer you are to the enemy when you release your projectile attacks. We also receive some utility and DPS boost from the Scion Ascendant Berserker and Raider classes. One of the nice things about this build is you have a lot of flexibility when choosing Scion Ascendant classes because depending on what you want to achieve, a lot of them will work. All the Ranger classes, Slayer from the Duelist, Berserker from the Marauder, Inquisitor, Elementalist, even Trickster. Defensively, the build is evasion and dodge based, utilizing Keystone passive Acrobatics and Phase Acrobatics. It also uses Lightning Coil for damage mitigation when damage does get through. Utility flasks play an important role defensively in this build. All three, Topaz, Quartz, and Jade, further increase this build's defense mechanisms. Lastly, the 1.5% leech from the Berserker subclass adds a huge layer of defense, enabling this build to do difficult maps and mods. All these defenses allow the build to play more aggressive and in point-blank range. In terms of actual gameplay, the main focus is using Blast Rain efficiently so that its damage is maximized by point blank. You'll see in these highlights that I try to play in close proximity to packs and release projectiles as close as possible without compromising too much safety. Your ability to balance risk-reward with positioning in order to maximize DPS is a player skill that is constantly tested in this build. That being said, the build does so much damage that in extremely difficult maps and situations, you can play the distance game and still dish out strong damage without compromising maximum DPS too much. I also run a Frenzy with Curse on Hit Temp Chain setup to slow enemies and generate and maintain frenzy charges. The movement utility skill Blink Arrow is used for manual dodging and creating decoys. Mirror Arrow is also used mainly for boss fights and crazy situations in order to defuse danger because it actually draws good aggro. When available, Vol Haste is used to increase damage and clear speed. I felt this build was complete at level 90, so from 90 to 93, which is when this build ripped, I pushed it to do difficult content. I rolled difficult mods on red maps like double damage with vulnerability, monster crit mods, utilized Zana by adding onslaught, didn't skip any bosses, ran no life or mana regen. I threw the kitchen sink at this build in terms of difficult content. One thing to note is this was done on suboptimal gear, so there's a lot of room for improvement. The most important offensive stats to look for on gear is weapon elemental damage, also known as WED, and accuracy. That being said, min-maxing your jewelry slots is going to be quite expensive because you will be paying a premium for rings and amulets with WED, accuracy, high life, and high resistances. For a bow, you want high flat elemental damage and WED, hence the Imperial bow I'm using. In this case, the bow is tri-elemental damage, but you could also opt for two very high flat elemental damage mods and a high non-implicit WED roll. Alpha Sal is the best in slot for the boost it provides in your offensive auras. Aziri Step is the best in slot for boots, and Lightning Coil is probably the best in slot for its mitigation purposes, although if you wanted, it's possible to run a different chest with an altered flask setup. In terms of links for Blast Rain, I have added lightning damage, faster attacks, elemental focus, WED, and increased AoE. In Alpha's Howl I have Anger, Wrath, Blink Arrow, and faster attacks. Ideally, if you're min-maxing, you should run a max level in Power and Enlighten. In my gloves, I have a cast when damage taken setup with Molten Shell, Summon Flame Golem, and Enfeeble. In my boots, I have Frenzy, GMP, Curse on Hit, and Temp Chains. In my bow, I have a Vol Haste linked to increased duration, Clarity, Mirror Arrow, and faster attacks. In terms of skill tree, I opted for the Scion Life Wheel. I have aura passives like Charisma and Influence for DPS increases from Anger and Wrath. I have DPS passives like Point Blank, Forces of Nature, Projectile Damage, Acuity, and Arcing Blows. Defensively, I have passives like Acrobatics and Phase Acrobatics, 1 Mana Leech node, Primal Spirit for increased flash charges gained, and Survivalist, which was an experimental choice and I'm not entirely sure it's worth it. They seem underwhelming. In terms of jewels, I use Mantra of Flames, which increases fire elemental damage based on the number of buffs on your character. This is why I'm running a level 1 Clarity and a cast when damage taken Molten Shell setup. I'm also running Static Electricity, which increases top end lightning damage based on dex in the surrounding area. In this case, it captures 80 dex. And I'm also using jewels that have high life and projectile damage rolls. You can check the description for a link to the skill tree and a more detailed look into my gear. I hope you guys enjoyed the build. Thanks for watching.